I'm really very glad to meet so many colleagues from Germany and also from Lithuania, coming from not just from our society but also from the humanistic society. We joined together to speak about from its relevance for nowadays understanding of psychoanalysis of human nature and his application of his ideas, I think, in our everyday practice. Yeah, I think it's very logical that we are meeting to speak about Fromm, who was a very international person. He spent his life in Germany, in the United States, in Mexico, doing a lot of work and of joining people together, and he was the one who stood at the birth of IFPS, International Federation of Psychoanalytic Societies. So he continues to join people together from different countries, from different cultures, and I'm very glad that we are continuing this today here in our meeting. I would try to say some words about the importance of Fromm in Lithuania. And here he was also quite important person. On one way, he was one of the psychoanalysts who was recognized and allowed by censorship, Soviet censorship in the Soviet occupation times. First of his books in Lithuanian language were published under the Soviet regime. Probably it was because of his critical standpoint towards capitalistic society. I think it made possible those publications. And before your visit, I made some short research about his publications in Lithuanian language. And I found that 7 books of Erich Fromm were translated and published in Lithuanian language. Just to mention them, it's Art of Loving, Escape from Freedom, The Forgotten Language, To Have or To Be, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, The Heart of a Man, and Man for Himself. Coming today to the conference, I entered the one door from the entrance of the hotel. We have so-called central bookstore of Kaunas. I found 4 books of Erich Fromm in Lithuanian language which can be purchased now. So I think he's a very important person in Lithuania who was allowed and whose ideas allowed us to get some understanding about psychoanalytic ideas. And also I think about humanistic practices and humanistic ideas. And Erich Fromm was an important person for development of our society, Kaunas Society for the Studies of Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy. And now I will proceed with my presentation. So, thinking of Erich Fromm was introduced to our society by our colleagues from Seminario de Sociopsychoanalysis from Mexico. So, I was glad to hear that there are people from Mexico also. Yeah. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Seminario is also member of IFPS, and it has developed in the process of continuing research on the social character of the Mexican villages, started by Erich Fromm. One of the founders of Seminario and the Secretary General of IFPS, Sonia Goiman de Milan, was very supportive to our society and its development and acceptance to IFPS also. In August 2007, 4 of her colleagues came to Kaunas with a 1-week seminar about Fromm's clinical thinking and about his research on social character. Important part of the seminar was our experiential exercise with the interpretative questionnaire developed by Fromm for study of social character. Members of our society had practiced both interviewing and answering it. Answered questionnaires were discussed and interpreted during our meeting with Mexican colleagues. Concept of social character seems very relevant to us, living and practicing in the country which is still in the process of adaptation to the recent extreme political, economic and cultural changes. It provided important perspective towards the social processes in Lithuania after establishment of the independence. And what is more, it emerged in my self-analysis later, working with especially younger patients, new generation, growing in a new social and economic environment, different from the one in which I was grown. This presentation was inspired by the reflections on that seminar and personal clinical experience. So it's not a kind of some scientific study, it's my personal reflections. And I hope that it will also provide some knowledge about people living in the country for those who are visiting it today. After regaining its independence in 1991, Lithuania is going through dramatic changes of social, cultural, and economic foundations. As always, changes are not just positive. For more than 20 years, Lithuania has one of the highest incidents of committed suicides, which is exceeding 40 cases for 10,000 inhabitants, which is 4 times more than average in European society. What reflects the high prevalence of depression in the population. Before Soviet occupation, this rate of suicide didn't exceed 10 cases for 10,000. So it was like average in Europe. The number of suicides had dramatically decreased again in the period of progressive Gorbachev reforms before the liberation and the first year after liberation of Lithuania from Soviet Union. But soon after change of socio-economic system and beginning of a short but very harsh period of wild capitalism and invasion of marketing culture, it had overgrown even previous numbers. On one side, this is probably one of the obvious illustrations to the influence of changes in socio-economic conditions on individual psychic health. One of the explanations for this could be found in the description of social character and its interaction with socio-economic factors, individual personality and psychopathology, developed by Eric Fromm and Michael Maker. Social character could be called internalized culture, interacting with the individual character of the person. In that sense, social character constitutes social foundations of the individual personality. Culture provides not just moral values, ideals, which are part of super-ego in our understanding, but also gives a meanings to social behavior shaped by the social group where a person is living and developing. Social character develops under influence of social and economic relationships, mode of production, geographic, historical, and other complex conditions. It influences individual development during the whole life, facilitating or impeding person's adaptation to the changes in socio-economic environment and culture. Social character changes slower than the culture or even more dynamic socio-economic systems, but its transformations are facilitated by the pressure of those faster changes. A significant mismatch between the person's social character and the new socio-economic requirements or cultural values can cause feeling of disconnectedness from the environment, causing anxiety, depression, during the periods of intensive social changes. Especially to those persons who have certain character traits like low productivity, in the meaning of Fromm. Michael Maker, the scholar and colleague of Eric Fromm, had done explorations of social character in different rural and urban areas in Mexico, United States, United Kingdom, and Sweden. Despite significant variations in social character, some similar tendencies were found that were summarized by him in the article, The Two Voices of Eric Fromm, the prophetic and analytic. To quote him, overall, the more that people live village life and adapt to industrial society, the more detached they are from direct emotion and authentic relationships, and to some degree, dreams and inner life. Bureaucratic middle managers and professionals are the ones most forced to market themselves, and their over-adaptation can cause symptoms of depression and self-disgust. Lithuania is a small country in the Middle East, Europe, at the Baltic seashore, with a population of 3 million, 80% being native Lithuanians. We were the last pagans in Europe, baptized just in the end of 14th century. This political change, not just religious, I think political change, demanded the change of our economic mode. Robbery, invasions to the neighboring countries, which were Catholic already for some centuries, were no longer acceptable. But still, remaining high rates of violent crimes and suicide let us think that aggressiveness was not successfully sublimated in our social characters. In the Middle Ages, even Vikings were precautious towards Lithuanian tribes, Kurshi. There is even some songs, folk songs, that we are afraid of Lithuanians coming, Kurshi coming. Now Lithuanians are depicted in Scandinavian mass media as more dangerous criminals. So we have the same, at least the international reputation. Because of the plain landscape with fertile soil and lack of natural goods, Lithuania had been a traditionally agricultural country. In the year 1953, 62% of the population was living and working in rural areas. What was changed during the years of Soviet occupation and the process of industrialization? In 1989, just 33% were living in the rural area. Before gaining independence from Russian Empire in 1918, just 10% of European population in Lithuania were Lithuanians. A significant part of it was consisted by Jewish population, Russian and Polish population. So Lithuanian culture and intelligentsia was nurtured in the landlord's estates. Even now, intelligentsia is sometimes called second generation from the cloth, reflecting deep roots in country culture. In many regards, social character of Lithuanian villages was similar to the ones described by From in Mexico. Hard-working, hoarding, often alexithemic, distrustful. A rather cold climate allows just one harvest in the year, what demands development of food preservation technologies and facilitates hoarding character features. Rather unpredictable weather conditions and prevalence of small independent farms facilitated creativity and development of productive hoarding character features. Due to its geographic position, Lithuania was many times occupied by invaders from west and east. In 20th century, I counted 5 occupations of Lithuania in 100 years. Often they were trying to change cultural foundations of the country, religion, language, socioeconomic system. More than 20 years, Lithuanian language was forbidden in Lithuania to be used officially, not just like in Soviet years, but in all the Russian Empire years. It had formed such national traits as resistance, conservatism, and isolation, which allowed the survival of cultural foundations in the villages. Most violent attacks on its social and cultural foundations were started during the Soviet occupation in 1940. The privation of people from the possession of the land and means of production suppressed the productivity, exchanging it to the promise of security, guaranteed by strong authoritarian authorities. Removal of people from the land they were cultivating to collective settlements, imported tradition of consuming strong alcohol, facilitated detachment from the authentic relationships and development of fatalistic helplessness, directly related to increase of suicidal rates. Authoritarian solar system had also facilitated the development of traits characteristic for receptive and bureaucratic social characters. Passivity, vulnerability to dependency, striving for intimate relationships, acceptance of hierarchy, organizational loyalty, moralism, identification with parental authority and role. Cruel suppression of 8 years armed resistance after Second Soviet occupation in the years from 1944 to 52, killing or sending to exile 200 inhabitants, which consisted 10% of Lithuanians. These were the most productive and socially active persons. Persecution of dissidents, prohibition of religion, ideologization and censorship of cultural activities were intended to increase the submissiveness. But the effect was opposite. Strengthening of national pride and creativity in non-violent, silent resistance against the occupants. Best examples of it were political anecdotes and special double-meaning language in the movies or literature. We have a saying that one language is for the kitchen, another is for the street. You have to live in this double position, knowing what to do, what to tell to whom. It had changed paradoxically after liberation of the country. Collapse of the Iron Curtain and exposure to the prospering marketing economy and consumer culture of the West after 50 years of isolation had made most of people feel hopelessly small and poor. Least productive and adaptive persons experienced a quiet independence as the loss of security and caring authorities. With increase of anxiety and longing for the old system, all looking for its substitute in European Union or NATO. More productive persons accepted new economic opportunities for development and taking advantage from their exploitative or hoarding character traits to improve their satisfaction with lives. In the last decades of the century, suicide rates remained the highest among middle-aged males living in the rural areas, reaching 100 cases for 10,000 inhabitants. It's 1% of those people killing themselves every year. One of the reasons was that villagers with receptive character traits experienced helpless incapacity to deal with the regained land and painful incompetence in the changed independent socioeconomic system. Emigration had become one of the biggest social problems in Lithuania. 1/3 of the population emigrated abroad during the last 15 years. Other receptive characters striving to be fed by the omnipotent capitalistic mother or searching for symbiosis with this mother. Or are they productive, hoarding, and narcissistic entrepreneur characters looking for the better opportunities for their self-realization? Discussion on this question continues in mass media and in different social environments for many years already. And no, probably it doesn't give the one answer, couldn't be answered in one way. These processes in Lithuania coincided with the occurrence of new mode of production and industries of communications technology in the Western countries, and with the development of the new interactive type of social character. It is based on ideals of independence, free agency, tolerance, with the appreciation of self-development and self-marketing, innovativeness, proneness to experiment and to consumer. Demands of new global market economy for such character traits were most easily accepted by young, educated persons with least experience in the authoritarian bureaucratic Soviet system. But it brought together new anxieties about uncertain employment, acceptance by the group, and social isolation. These fears are rooted not only in specific features of family dynamics, like both parents working, mother staying with the child quite for a shorter time than it was before. And social environment of interactive generation. In so rapidly and inconsecutively changing socioeconomic environment and culture as in post-Soviet Lithuania, persons with new social character traits can experience real misunderstanding and rejection from persons with prevailing bureaucratic traits of social character. When experienced from parental figures, this rejection can lead to significant inner and interpersonal conflicts with increased insecurity, lack of self-trust, loss of productiveness, and depression. Illustration with clinical case follows. 25-year-old patient applied for analysis because he was feeling depressed, dissatisfied with himself. He said that he had lost trust in himself, didn't want to see anyone, feeling down and ashamed, was unable to go to the meetings, searching for the job. He thought he was suffering from depression, and he was looking specifically for psychoanalytic treatment because he had read about psychoanalysis in the internet and believed that it was best treatment for him. It is rather not typical in Lithuania, where psychoanalysis is not so well known after 50 years of prohibition. And new technologies like CBT and others are coming with very wide advertising and more easily can be found. This period of depression has started after he had left his bachelor studies in economics at the end of the last semester of the 4th years of bachelor studies. There was no obvious reason for that. Some months before, he had broken up with his girlfriend after a short reunion, but he didn't consider that as something important. It was at least second episode of depression for him. The first one had started 3 years ago after his first separation with this girlfriend because of her infidelity. They were together for 4 years. During that period, he had left his studies in technology university and engineering, but had successfully developed his own business running computer game saloon. He had abandoned it when he was depressed. Similarly, this time, he had developed a business plan with internet trading of artworks, but had abandoned it at the last moment when depression began. One of the reasons for not finishing it was that he didn't manage to go to the potential sponsor for the project, for a meeting. He was a second child in a typically patriarchal family. His father had grown up without the parents, who died in exile after the Second World War. Patient described him as very cold man, authoritarian, and always dissatisfied with his son. Mother was empathetic and caring, but often missing at work, leaving him with unsatisfied, striving for secure maternal attachment. Therapy began with realizing that psychoanalytic setting was unaffordable because of financial resources. The psychoanalytic treatment is not paid by insurance in Lithuania, it's just private. Patients pay for themselves, and it's quite expensive treatment. So agreement for psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy had been made. Quite unexpected was to realize that in the first sessions that the patient had limited capacities for introspection, despite declared active interest in psychoanalysis. First probative transference interpretations were hastily rejected by him. And the sessions were shortened by patients' constant lateness. This caused some disappointment in analysts and led to just partially recognized countertransference reaction, beginning to apply more cognitive and supporting techniques, encouraging or pushing the patient to pull up, to finish education, to finish his business project. depression and social withdrawal was getting even worse. The patient was signaling regression and lack of mutual understanding, demanding for drug treatment, for antidepressants. At that moment, self-analysis of countertransference helped analyst to find himself enacting projective counter-identification with the projected by the patient aspects of bad object, of the demanding and evaluating father. Patient was looking for a good object of parental figure who would be supportive in his attempts to build an independent living, at the same time feeling fear of punishment and devaluation for not succeeding at that. His longing for good, unconditionally loving mother, accepting him with all his features, his failures and losses, was too unacceptable in the context of therapeutic relationship with 15 years older man, and was concealed by reaction formation. Patient's attempts to look competent and potent, denying the regressive longings, were so effective that the analyst once had even experienced fantasies that the patient was just pretending he had those symptoms. It could be another reason for the analyst's identification with castrating father. Even very cautious interpretation of a dipole situation in transference, countertransference relationships sounded very frightening to the patient. He reacted telling that he doesn't question the authority of the therapist, and that he always realized how righteous and were the demands of his father. More acceptable for the patient and fruitful for the development of the interpersonal understanding was analyst's call into question eagerness of the father and other parenting figures to understand his needs and support his attempt to realize his capabilities. After some time, the patient started learning the programming language and doing first programs for internet pages as freelancer, a programmer. He again was constantly late for the sessions, complaining on the lack of time because urgent jobs. After getting a contract to make a web page for psychotherapists from UK, he began to discuss possible application of CBT for him, and even tried to learn some methods of overcoming social phobias from the manual. It brought back to the session's discussion about Oedipal rivalry, which was again denied by the patient. Soon new period of depressed mood occurred at the beginning of the school year, and coinciding with analyst questioning about the plans to continue and finish the studies of economics. This coincidence stimulated to scrutinize the countertransference reactions and possibility of enacted revenge to the Oedipal rivalry of the patient. At that moment, the self-analysis of the therapist and the further development of the therapeutic process were very much helped by the recall of the article Towards a Science of Social Character, published by Michael Macoty in International Forum of Psychoanalysis in 2002. In this article, he describes main differences between the bureaucratic and newly occurring interactive social characters. Rereading this article, the analyst was able to recognize those features of bureaucratic social character which he shared with the father of the patient, with whom he also shared childhood and education in the autocratic Soviet system. Satisfying security needs by working in a big governmental institution instead of concentrating on the development of his private activities, giving preference to the formal education instead of acquisition of effective and practicable skills. For therapists, it was keeping his position in the big medical university hospital despite constant frustrating conflicts with their prevailing biopharmacological attitudes and rather successful private practice. 5 years of psychoanalytic educations after 11 years of medical studies was implicitly communicating to the patient the value given to formal education by the therapist. For the father of the patient, it was keeping his low-paid position in big governmental enterprise instead of developing his rather successful private business, Father was explicitly insisting that his son would finish university, practice for some years as an employee in some reliable enterprise, and only then could begin to try to develop his own business, private business. Worth mentioning also the best friend of the patient who was doing successful career in the bureaucratic machine of municipality of the city. These explicit and implicit requirements from authoritative figures were in conflict with the requirements of the new interactive society and with interactive social character traits of the patient. His abilities for experimentations, for being innovative, for self-development and self-marketing in the global market of World Wide Web were rather adapted in the new socio-economic reality. But at the same time, they make him feel resigning traditional values and losing social bonds, disappointing his father, or being different and maybe worse than his peers, what was confirmed by rejection of his girlfriend. Actually, it could be understood also as a repetition of mother's rejection in the first years of life. Implicit but sensible attitudes of the therapist were not just another confirmation for these anxieties and self-disappointments. They were also bringing feeling of misunderstanding and resentment into the interpersonal field of therapy and prompting resistance. Proposed interpretations and discussions about the differences of social characters as the reason for misunderstanding in therapeutic and other relationships was more acceptable to the patient than this classical interpretation of the Oedipal complex. It was the moment of meeting of minds. It was followed by unanticipated changes in social relationships. The patient got involved with a new girlfriend for the first time after separation. He had a lot of one-night stands, very short relationships before, during the last 2 years. But this was the first more permanent relationship, long-lasting, more intimate relationship. Though it didn't last too long, but that time it didn't cause depressive self-devaluation and social withdrawal for the patient after separation from this girl who left him because of her ex-boyfriend. Rapid socio-economical changes demand development of new social character traits to be successful in the process of social selection. But these traits come into conflict with still prevailing cultural values or individual superego ideals. It can cause the feelings of break away from cultural basis and losing bonds with social environment, leading to the depression and social anxieties. Michael Makovi, describing newly occurring interactive social character, states that social anxiety about group acceptance is typical to this new character, as children in interactive families are less dependent emotionally on parents. But alternative hypothesis could be that it is typical to transitional period and clash of different social characters. This clash can happen also in the interpersonal encounter of analytic treatment and would be taken into account analyzing intersubjective experiences, especially in its difficult moments and times of intensive socio-economical changes. I think that the concept of social character hadn't lost its relevance in the globalizing world and gives an important perspective on the analytic encounter, especially working with the patients with significantly different social and cultural background.
Thank you very much. We have the opportunity to start a discussion, and my question is there any question in regard to his presentation, maybe also in regard to his case history he offered, and how he understood the processes which went on in this psychoanalytic theory? Please.
There are two things which I want to mention. The first one, in our German translation, we got wrong figures. In your paper, you present a relation 100 to 10,000 in the suicidal rates, and in the paper we read 100 to 100,000. So this should be corrected.
So 10,000 is correct?
100
Then 1%.
in 10,000. Usually suicidal rates accounted for 10,000 in population.
I did the relation to 100,000.
So
I looked according to the English manuscript, and maybe it differs a little bit.
excuse me, maybe that was my.
Yeah.
And
Nevertheless,
the other question, following your lecture, I noticed, and perhaps you mentioned that, but I didn't realize, there was a collision between the, say, social character of the client and the social character of the analyst. And what's the relevance of this collision? Can this be showed theoretically or analytically or whatsoever?
What's the relevance?
One aspect you mentioned, he learned by this patient.
I learned by this patient a lot, yeah.
But of course it also can be a resistance problem. It took some time until Maccabee thing came, you got aware of and had an access to this interactive side of the patient, and that is to say his own power. So I did understand.
Yes, and I think another important and very relevant, I think, that of course I was also thinking about our interaction in more traditional analytical ways of this, thinking about his inner fight against this authoritarian father. I understood that there is a lot of this in his attitude towards me, but he is a person who was not very able to accept analytical traditional interpretations, and this way of explaining him, meaning in many senses the same, intergenerational differences and this conflict between generations was more acceptable to him, and it was very, how to say, very lively, because it was very related to what was going in his life. He had the new profession he acquired, this program. It's very, very, how to say, illustrative to this new interactive social character type. So it was, I think, for him very allowed for him to accept those also analytic understanding of his inner reality and interpersonal processes.
Are there other comments, questions?
I have a very perhaps marketing-oriented question. How could this young man pay for the treatment?
How he could pay for the treatment?
Because it, as I know, it is not paid by the insurance, but he has to pay privately.
Yeah, it was another thing, and which made this process triangle relationship. In the beginning of treatment, his father was paying for treatment. Yeah. So it was a very complicated situation. Yeah. But quite after he started working as a freelancer programmer, he started paying himself. And now he is a very successful freelancer. Now he lives, again in my sense, normal life. He has an intimate, permanent relationship with a woman for already, I think, 3 years. They are living, they are raising a daughter together, though they are not married. And it's another, in Lithuania it was not very usual in my generation, but it is very usual in his generation. And he has this private practice of freelance programming. He has normal incomes. He is able to keep his family and to pay psychotherapy.
Did I understand you right? He never paid by himself, no, he was never paid by any insurance company?
No.
Also not the psychoanalytic founded therapy. You changed, it was no psychoanalysis, it was a psychoanalytic
Therapy.
yeah.
Because he was able to pay in the very beginning 2 weekly sessions, then it was changed to 1 weekly session. No, it was,
Have you other proofs than only the fact that the client seemed to be more interested in your interpretation? I mean, can you say that there was some personal development or some after these interpretations? Because I think if it's only the fact that he accepted in a better way your interpretations, it could mean that it was just a little bit more interesting than the old-fashioned traditional psychoanalysis.
I thought I had mentioned, but maybe just very shortly in my presentation, that after this, because it was really some, before doing those interpretations, there was quite some stalemate in this therapeutic situation, with feelings really of misunderstanding and of, and after this, I noticed development not just in our relationship, but also in his living. One of those was this establishment of more of longer and more intimate relationship with the lady. And another thing that he was, I think he accepted this his private business of programmer as more worth thing, you know, of better value. Because before he was, it was felt that he was feeling a kind of, I'm not professional, I'm not, it's just like something, a kind of play for me, just to try to experiment to do. And then he accepted it and started developing it as a normal professional activity. And his also this financial situation had improved, and
I think if I may comment, do a comment, I think your case history is an interesting example for the very Freudian interpretation too, because I think the topic of this therapy was formulated in the sentence how he described his mother. My mother was empathic and did care, but she often went not to work. I had to translate from the German to English. And she really did not give me a secure attachment or whatever, or fulfillment. So he is lacking of this very early wishes to get fed and more and more and more. And that was one aspect of the social system. The older generation grew up, and the problem is that not the father conflicts are the really contradictory, but to get rid of this feeling, I got to less, I want more from this mother, from this mother state or social system, and I think in this respect it was the best step that he had to pay, or at least when he started to work with this Lancer program, he was able to pay by himself, and that is to say, he was effective by himself. He could effect anything, and he felt his own powers at this point. And that was a decisive step in his therapy, to my understanding, and not the conflict with the father and Oedipus or whatever. That at least would be my interpretation, according to Fromm, who also was not so much in favor of the Oedipus complex and castration views and so on. Okay.
But if I could add one thing just now, during the discussion, what returns to my memories, that really in this relationship with me, and especially after this part of therapy, of interpreting and of accepting those differences in my and his understanding, because of those probably social character things, I think he started more looking for possibility of identification with me.
Yeah.
He became very interested how I organize my private practice. After 2 years, even he had rented an office in the same street where I have my private office. So I think it was also this. So yeah.
That's